Hamilton Township is an excellent place to live. Located in New Jersey within driving distance of Philadelphia and New York City, the town is a perfect spot for working commuters to call home. While it's not exactly a small town by New Jersey standards, parts of it have a small town feel, and since 2000, Hamilton has consistently been called one of the safest places to live. Besides that, Hamilton also boasts a rich history, including a role in the American Revolution, as well as numerous other historical landmarks in the area. But weaved into this celebrated history is a dark tale mostly forgotten. A tale of murder and terror that played out upon the banks of the Delaware River in a section of Hamilton called Duck Island. On this episode of Destination Anywhere, we're going to examine the string of homicides that made headlines in the late 1930s known as the Duck Island Murders. Before you understand the story of the Duck Island Murders, you first have to understand the setting. Duck Island wasn't always the big landmass connected to the mainland. In this Mercer County map from 1918, you could see that at this point, Duck Island was still actually an island. When you fast forward up to 1938, you could see that Duck Island was less of an island and more of a marshy wetland with just narrow canals separating it from the western edge of Hamilton and the southwest edge of Trenton. While the island grew into the mainland, it remained a barren chunk of underdeveloped land less traveled by the majority of local inhabitants. In fact, its deserted feel made it so perfect for a crime that it was chosen as the setting of the 1936 mystery novel Halfway House, part of the popular Ellery Queen fictional crime series. Unfortunately, as often the case, less than 2 years later, life would imitate art, as Duck Island would be the setting for a brutal murder. It was election night, November 8th of 1938. 20-year-old Vincenzo Tonzello and 16-year-old Mary Mitovich, both of Trenton, would quietly park their car on a path off of Duck Island Road in an area known to locals as Lover's Lane. Soon, any love in the air was shattered by gunfire as an armed assailant approached the car and reportedly demanded money before critically wounding Tonzello with a gunshot to his neck. Miss Mitovich was shot in the lower body but managed to survive when the killer fled the scene. She was taken to Trenton's St. Francis Hospital, where she was only able to provide police with a brief description of the assailant before she would succumb to her wounds just 2 days later. Over the next few weeks, police would scour the area for clues as well as question numerous suspects. Soon, the case would go cold, but it was less than a year later that the Duck Island violence would reconvene. This time in October of 1939, a mother in her 30s named Catherine Werner and a man in his late 20s named Frank Casper were found murdered just a few hundred feet from where the young couple was slain the year before. This attack was more brutal than the first, but just like the first murders, it was apparent to investigators that a shotgun was the weapon of choice by the killer. Not only was it the same weapon type, police soon used firing pin markings to confirm the same sawed-off shotgun was used in each set of murders. Much like the first case, investigators would exhaust all clues before the case would once again go cold. Again, a year would go by, but in November of 1940, another couple would meet its demise in a similar fashion. This couple, 24-year-old Carolina Morcone and 25-year-old Louis Kovacs, wisely decided to avoid a now closed-off Duck Island for their tryst, and instead found a path off of Cypress Lane just 3 miles away from Duck Island in Hamilton. Unfortunately, they were still in the death radius of the Duck Island killer, as they were both murdered with shotgun blasts around 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. With investigators certain of a connection between the 3 sets of murders, they pressed on to find the shotgun used in the killings. And finally, a big break came in March of 1942. As a couple was sitting in a car near Tullytown, PA, just a couple miles from Duck Island, an armed assailant fired on them, critically injuring the male passenger. As the woman tried to escape, the criminal clubbed her in the head with a gun. During the struggle, a piece of the gun was left at the scene of the crime, and luckily for police, that piece of the weapon featured the serial number. At that point, detectives were able to trace the weapon to Kruger's pawn shop on South Broad Street in Trenton, where it had been pawned in 1937. It would take another year, but by the end of 1943, detectives had a suspect in custody by the name of Clarence Hill. A father of two and Sunday school teacher, the 33-year-old Hill lived on nearby Wilfred Avenue, just minutes from where all the murders took place. Interestingly, Hill was initially questioned in 1938 after the first murders when police questioned all shotgun owners in the area. At the time, Hill was able to produce a different shotgun that satisfied the police, and he was dismissed as a suspect. Now, fast forward to 1944, and once investigators were able to identify Hill as the suspect, the FBI located him in South Carolina, where he had been serving in the Army. Hill was then transferred to Fort Dix military base in New Jersey, where he was questioned. After hours of interrogation, Hill gave a written confession, and by February he was charged with 6 counts of murder. It wouldn't be until December of 1944 when Hill would go on trial for the first set of murders back in 1938. At one part in the trial, the jury would even take a field trip to see the setting of the dreary Duck Island and envision what it would have been like the night of the murders. A contentious point of the trial revolved around whether Hill's signed confession from Fort Dix would be admissible, with his defense team arguing it was beaten out of him. Eventually, Mercer County Judge Frank Katzenbach ruled the confession would be allowed as evidence. When the trial came to a close, it took the jury just 5 hours to find Clarence Hill guilty of first-degree murder with a recommendation of life in prison. 2 weeks later, Judge Katzenbach agreed with the jury and handed down a life sentence, and the Duck Island murder case was closed. "75 years since Clarence Hill's trial, the Duck Island murders are now just a faint memory of Hamilton's past. If you're wondering what happened to Clarence Hill, he made parole on his 5th attempt way back in 1964 at the age of 53. The parole board also decided to throw out the other murder charges, as some key witnesses had died, as well as the fact that the Fort Dix confession wouldn't have been admissible by 1964 court standards. Hill would fade into obscurity and eventually die in 1973. Today, Duck Island still has an odd feel to it. Through all my research, I wasn't able to locate the exact location of any of the crimes, but that's okay. Even though there's some buildings and some life on the island now, it's easy to imagine how secluded it once was for a makeout session or even a crime. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Destination Anywhere. If you want to see more stories about history, mysteries, or other weird happenings, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to the Mickey Shuffle on YouTube.